To you, Biju.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Hopefully, I'm very audible. All right. So, thank you so much. Let me start by introducing our panelists and welcome to all of the audience and members, friends and colleagues in the industry. Um, the first panelist here, let me just share my screen so you can see them. The first panelist is Ahmed. Ahmed is an integration engineer and a serial entrepreneur, and he started startups all the way from his university days. Since then, he's co-founded several startups, including Airlift, where he is the CEO currently. Ahmed is extremely passionate about robotics, mobility, and mobile on-demand services. Welcome to the panel, Ahmed. The second panelist is Satya. Satya is a partner and head of infrastructure, government, and healthcare for KPMG in Singapore and Indonesia. He has worked on urbanization and transport projects over the last 25 years across Asia and Middle East. In particular, he's worked on financing and commercial models using transport as a catalyst for economic development of cities, and most recently on the readiness of cities to adopt autonomous vehicles. Welcome to the panel, Satya. The next panelist is Firas. Firas is the head of marketing for Toyota and Lexus in Qatar. He has significant automotive industry experience as well as consulting experience from his days in Japan. He has some very, very interesting and unique sales and marketing insights as well as cultural perspectives. He's involved in the mobility as a service effort of Toyota Motor Corporation as they look to move from a pure automobile company to more of a mobility provider. Welcome to the panel, Firas.
Thank you, Biju. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Our final panelist is Abdullah. Abdullah is the Deputy CEO of the Qatar Free Zones Authority, where he oversees business development. He serves on the board of Qatar Venture Capital, the global venture capital arm of Qatar Free Zones. He's also the vice chairman and the board of at the board of Qatar Science and Technology Park. He's a member of Qatar's Research Development and Innovation Council. He also served on the board of Qatar EDIR, which manages projects, smart city projects like Lusail. Welcome to the panel, Abdullah. And with that, what I will do is we will have a couple of housekeeping items, both for the panelists and the audience. A quick time check for the panelists. I will have 3 questions that I will prompt each of you for your statements. You'll have about 1 to 2 minutes to answer them. And then, depending on the time, we can do a round of, summary and lessons to be shared with our audience. To our members of the audience, we will not be able to take questions directly today, but as we go through the panel and you think of questions, please note them down and send it to through email to dscs@misharab.com. That's once again dscs@misharab.com, and our colleagues from Misharab will revert back with you. That said, I just to tee up our discussion, I want to give a few opening thoughts. Having been in the smart city space for the past decade, I can say with a fair amount of confidence that comes from advising large cities, large campuses operated by federal governments, as well as large property developers across the world, that the notion of smart cities has a big bearing on the future of mobility and autonomous vehicles. It's something that's here to stay and something that impacts all of us, because we live in cities. With the pandemic creating such an havoc in all of our lives and the need for more contactless and touchless mobility experiences, on top of our traditional demand for more time to do things that matter, autonomous vehicles has that propensity to give us that promise to get rid of some of those issues. Some of the traffic challenges and accidents, as you analyze them globally, the cause has been the biggest cause has been humans, right? We humans have been responsible for that, tremendous cause of death through road accidents, and so autonomous vehicles also has the promise of either reducing or eliminating the human negligence when it comes to accidents. Uh, the whole topic itself is very interesting. Over the past, recent past, we've seen a lot of frugal as well as some cutting edge innovation from our friends in the automotive industry in terms of both terrestrial, aerial, as well as underwater autonomous vehicles. And what we want to do on this complex and evolving and very interesting topic that absolutely requires a cross-industry collaboration. Spend the next 30 minutes or so to see, what is it that it will take for us to adopt autonomous vehicles, as well as look at what are some of the business models, what does the future hold for autonomous vehicles, as well as look at and see if there is some kind of a correlation between the pandemic and advancement of autonomous vehicles within our day-to-day lives. With that, I will start with the first question. I have three questions essentially to guide the panel. The first is how do we how do cities incorporate autonomous vehicles as a new transportation mode, as well as what is the business model that is to be adopted in order to have a safe and sustainable adoption of autonomous vehicles. I'll start with Ahmed. Ahmed, if you can please share your statements on that topic, please.
Of course, thank you, Bijun. Honestly speaking, I think this question is already answered. If you look at the market today, you have companies like Tesla, Waymo, Navia, and Uber that are really pushing the envelope in this domain. Especially with Uber, you could see clearly the shared autonomous mobility model that they're going for. But I would like to also divert the attention beyond personal and private passenger vehicles, looking at also autonomous self-driving delivery vehicles that are currently operating all around the world, very successful pilots. And Airlift being one of them, we just concluded a pilot in the Netherlands, starting another one soon here in Doha. And I think the key to this success is you have cities and governments advocating on behalf of these makers and enabling them to truly test not only their technology but also their business models in a sort of data-driven pilots. And these are not just pilots for some marketing mileage or publicity, but these are actually pilots looking into infrastructure requirements, safety, concerns of cybersecurity, looking at into insurance as well, and of course the business model and the user experience altogether. And I think this is the best way that was proven. It's a win-win situation for both the makers and the operators of these vehicles, and also for the cities, because it's a joint effort into learning about what the true potential for this technology is. In Airlift, we have adopted this manifesto to roll out our service, where it goes in parallel with the technology maturance. So we don't need to wait until we have a level 5 autonomy vehicle until we start learning along with the local cities, but it actually goes in parallel with this, some sort of ad hoc pilots. And I'm actually proud to say that even here in Qatar right now, we have business partners. We have cities as well involved, whether the education city or Musharraf downtown city. We have also insurance partners drafting the first of its type policies when it comes to self-driving vehicles, working all along together to learn about this new technology.
Thanks, Ahmed. Now, if I can call on you, Satya, to share your perspectives on what you've seen work in terms of adoption of future of mobility and autonomous vehicles in Singapore and other places.
Yeah, thank you, Biju. I think to answer your question, I think we have to look at the fact that implementing AV is a paradigm shift in the transportation system of a city. And it requires several moving parts to come together to make it happen. We at KPMG started looking at this a few years back, and to bring together all the complexity around this, we developed something called an Autonomous Vehicle Readiness Index. The index is really a blueprint which assesses the readiness of a city or a country, but also uses that opportunity to lay out clear areas that need to be worked on to bring AV into a city in a safe and sustainable manner, as you had asked. We assessed 28 different measures which are organized into 4 pillars. And I will talk through some of them in the interest of time. The first is policy and regulation. So in order to bring AV into any environment in a city, there's already an established ecosystem which is intricately operating from a number of parameters, safety, the level of the way the laws are defined, and the speed with which these laws can be changed to incorporate AV is an important aspect. The data sharing environment, because this is required, data is required to be shared across different players. And is there an AV focused agency within government which enables this to happen? So all of these and many others are the policy and regulation pillar. Now, the second pillar is infrastructure. And in this regard, we would look at the extent of EV charging stations, 4G coverage, mobile connection speed, broadband coverage, and the quality of roads. Why all of these are important? Because as we know, EV is an important precursor to bringing AV into a system in a meaningful and comprehensive way. So we use that to assess the quality of the infrastructure. The third big pillar is technology and innovation. And in this area, things like the level of AV partnerships, the number of AV related patents, the industry investments in AV, what's the extent of cloud computing, AI and IoT, and the EV market share and cybersecurity are factors that we need to look at to again ensure that we can bring AV into the market in a meaningful and sensible way. And finally, and probably most importantly, is consumer acceptance. How much of population is living near test areas? Is there a civil society tech use? What's the extent of ICT adoption and digital skills among consumers? And even something like online ride-hailing penetration. All of these give you a sense that the society is ready to adopt this new technology in a meaningful way and bring it to bear. So I would use these 4 pillars to really work out where would a country need to move. And in particular, I can talk later about Singapore, but again, these are the things that we would like to see if AV is to be successfully brought into any market.
Thanks, Satya. That's a very interesting perspective. No matter what the technology is, if people like you and me refuse to sit in the car or use autonomous, looks like it's not going to go too far. So with that, let me call on Firaz. If you can please share your experience being at the cusp of transformation and the automotive industry, what you guys are doing and what the industry is doing in general for increasing adoption of autonomous vehicles.
Well, thank you very much, Biju. I guess before you look at it from a macro level, you need to look at it from a micro perspective. Businesses and cities need to identify the current situation or current problem that exists. Then they need to identify the ideal situation that they should be in. And I guess they need to tackle the gap that exists between that. They need to identify the root cause and eventually set a goal. Starting specific areas dealing with mobility, like an all-exclusive leasing program, for example, flexible subscription, car share, corporate carpooling, even multi-modal initiatives and ride sharing are all, I guess, small steps that can and will eventually lead to autonomous driving. And autonomous driving comes in 5 levels, as Ahmed mentioned. And up to this date globally, we are at level 3. Level 4 is practically full autonomous driving. And at level 5, basically a steering wheel is not even required to be fixed in the vehicle. I definitely feel that we still have a considerable way to go, but we are getting there. And before we do, we need to ensure that the right infrastructure exists, like Satya San said, for self-driving vehicles, and the right mindset also exists on behalf of the users or the customers. I also believe that we should focus on developing AVs in specific sectors, such as smart cities, shopping malls, university campuses, and possibly even around the World Cup stadiums, ready to be used by end of 2022 here in Qatar. So, although we are facing hardship from the pandemic, there will always be a fundamental demand, I guess, for mobility, both public and private, in my opinion. And also, it will definitely exist in both B2B and B2C operations.
Thank you, Firaz. That's very interesting as what you see from an industry perspective. Finally, if I can call on you, Abdullah, to share your experiences and what some of the efforts and initiatives that you have going on to help increase, the adoption of autonomous vehicles.
Thanks. So I think my colleagues covered a lot of the key points around regulations and infrastructure. So I won't necessarily go into those, but maybe just from the perspective of the free zones, autonomous and let's say advanced mobility is definitely an area of big importance for us. From the investor level, we already have a number of different entities that are active on the advanced mobility and autonomous space. Both in the transport of goods as well as people, with a big focus on electric mobility as well, but it's also autonomous. The way we think about it is that there's still, and as some of my colleagues have touched on, still quite a lot of experimentation around the business model. Where exactly does autonomous add value? And this is especially the case in a place like Qatar, where labor costs are much lower than in other places, maybe in Europe or so, where we need to think beyond just replacing the driver. So the way we think about it here within the free zone is we're looking a lot at looking within the areas of cargo and cargo transport, where security is an additional very important consideration. We're also looking at the deployment of autonomous and small, I would say, micro-mobility solutions, which could become autonomous as well, around people movers and getting people to move throughout the free zones, between let's say the restricted access areas and the public areas, in a way which again, there's a security layer, which just makes it easier if we get rid of additional drivers and additional people. You can imagine that in the future, we're exploring how this can actually add value to the user. So how to give them a more seamless experience in terms of connectivity between the public transport and their final destinations. Within the free zones themselves today, we've already designated some areas and allow them for vehicle testing within the free zone public road by restricting access to those roads. And we're also developing a number of or planning the development of a number of specific infrastructure around, specialized testing rings, or even thinking about enhancement to the road infrastructure to allow for, again, let's say, first deployment of autonomous technology. So these are all the things that we're thinking about. But again, coming back to that main question of where is really the business case going to be? Is it going to be in delivery? Is it going to be in cargo? Is it going to be in people? And that's something that we're going to explore over the next period with our investors, and hopefully help them develop their business cases going forward.
Thank you, Abdullah. That's very interesting to note that within Qatar itself, there's so much going on, and you're actually providing the infrastructure for something very futuristic. Now, with that, I'd like to focus on the next question, which is around what are cities doing in terms of legal frameworks as well as policies, so that autonomous vehicles can actually become a reality in their cities. And I'll start with Firaz. Firaz, if you can share from your experience what you've seen as either challenges, hindrance, or a boost from a policy perspective for adopting autonomous vehicles, please.
Thank you, Biju. Well, I definitely can't answer the question from a legal background. I'm very limited on that, but I can definitely tell you that in order to develop those policies and procedures, I guess we need to create the best programmable mobility ecosystems with the proper software and development process. And to do that, we need to establish software-defined architecture, I guess, that will bring new technologies to the market and create new mobility value chains for people. Other procedures that cities could adopt is added value benefits or perks to the customers that end up investing, for example, in our case, in hybrid vehicles, or even electric vehicles, or using new mobility solutions altogether. Some of these added values, such as no custom duties on HEVs or EVs, developing charging stations for electric vehicles, which are already popping up all across the country in Qatar, and maybe even dedicated parking spaces, and maybe even a buyback guarantee program from distributors to entice customers, I guess, to buy and trade in a new HEV or EV vehicle with an existing one. So all these are sustainable perks, I guess, that cities and governments can offer to build towards autonomous driving. And even now, during COVID mobility, operators are acquiring fewer vehicles, unfortunately, and extending their use of existing vehicles. And major players are restructuring their old lines and investing or acquiring to pivot into new models. So there are definitely some issues that smart cities could tackle, and they can begin with that.
Thanks, Firaz. If I can call on you, Abdullah, to share some perspectives on what you're seeing from a legal and a regulatory, perspective on the adoption of autonomous vehicles, please.
Yeah, thanks. So I think there are still a lot of, and I know there's a few regions in the world that have kind of matured their regulatory and legislative framework to support autonomous. Although I think there's still, from what we've seen, there's still some divergence as to how different areas are approaching it. And it's for us, it's really still everybody's still in an experimentation phase. I mean, we've dealt with a number of autonomous developers, let's say, or vehicle developers that have severe, let's say, constraints or concerns still, even from their side, as to how they will deploy their technology. So not only from a regulatory perspective, but also thinking about reputation, thinking about safety, thinking about so I would say both the regulations and the technology is still moving. They're still moving towards each other, let's say, and there's still some space between them. The way that we think about it really is thinking about we go back to the use case. And so what we're thinking about is, rather than try to kind of answer all of these regulatory issues from now, let's find the use cases which are possible today, and let's develop them and develop that business case. So simple things like some of the autonomous makers that we've dealt with, for example, don't like to take a left turn because of the cross traffic implications of that. So again, it's thinking about how do we find the right paths and the right applications that avoids these more contentious issues, which opens up more exposure to accidents, more exposure to traffic, so forth and so on. So we're looking at off-road testing, so things along pedestrian areas. We're looking at, again, closed area testing. We're looking at certain circuit testing. And again, we're exploring where these, where, we're still trying to find that use case and that business case. We think the regulations will come with time. And, we're seeing still how the different regions and different countries are going to approach it.
Thanks, Abdullah. I think that's a very practical way of informing policy, to look at use cases, to look at testing, and then come up with policy rather than having a big brotherly attitude. Here's a policy, everyone shall follow. I think that's some very, very interesting perspectives. And with that, Satya, if I can call on you to share some of your experiences with what you're seeing within the policy and regulatory environments across the world.
Yeah, thank you, Biju. I think to answer that question, what I'd like to do is really chart, the journey Singapore has taken since 2014, because that is instructive. I really like what Abdullah said when he mentioned that technology and policy actually need to work, almost in tango to get to the right place on AV, because the reality is the technology is developing so rapidly, and it's really important for there to be a level of humility among the policy makers to really, somewhat follow what's happening and then adapt regulation to be relevant to ensure that the outcomes are achieved. So what happened in Singapore is in recognizing this construct, something called the Committee on Autonomous Road Transport for Singapore was developed in 2014. This committee comprised, international experts, academics, and industry representatives who actually worked kind of together to start thinking about, what legislation should be developed for AV to operate on roads, establish AV trial sites, develop technical standards for AV implementation, a set of testing protocols, and even set up an independent AV test center to conduct tests so that, before they can operate on public roads. And all of this has actually been very helpful in, moving the country forward progressively to develop AV, to bring AV to the roads. And as part of this, of course, extensive consultation with industry and developers, and a sandbox on legislative amendments, all of which then resulted in the Road Traffic Act for autonomous vehicles being passed in 2017 in Singapore, which actually then provides legislation for AVs to be tested on public roads. Now, this encompasses policy and guidelines for AVs to be on trial on public roads. So while the initial trial started, now, there can be a much more extensive testing on the roads, because there is a law which then allows this to happen. But remember, the technology is developing rapidly. So as part of this, again, in 2017, the Center for Excellence for Testing and Research for AV was set up. This is called CTRAN. And what CTRAN did was really to create a very strong test bed where the regulations and the tests could be carried out to see what works, what doesn't work in the context. So imagine, we are a tropical country, heavy rains, there's signal attenuation. How does this thing work? And to be able to do that, we needed proper testing conditions, which then informed, the changes in the testing and the regulatory regimes. And then in 2019, Singapore first published our standards, which we call Technical Reference 68, which then provides the provisional national standards to guide the industry in the development and deployment of AV. And this is an industry-led effort which involves a number of work groups comprising AV industry, research institutions, higher learning institutions, and government agencies, which then creates the target for AV developers to reach, and then, it seeks to eliminate risk and uncertainty surrounding the technology. So all of this, and so just like what Firas said, this was initially done with level 2, level 3, and in 2020, The TR68 was modified to consider 3-4, right? 5, we're still some way off, but I think this is where we are. And so this gives you a basic idea of the evolution and potentially an approach which countries which have similar frameworks can use to bring AV in a safe way to the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Satya. Now, Ahmed, if I can ask you to share some of your perspectives on the policy front as well, please.
Yeah, from a perspective of a maker, Biju, we never expected that cities will be able to just grab a blank paper and start drafting all these regulations and policies out of the blue. Like I said, we expected the enablement and the advocacy for the makers to pilot and test, and then, like Satya mentioned, evolve from that starting point. I mean, looking at the automotive industry, 100 years ago, they did not start with specifying what type of fonts to use on traffic signs. So we don't expect the same in this case with AVs. In terms of what cities are doing right now, I think there is a lot of progress being made. Satya mentioned their readiness index. Singapore is number 1. I might be biased, but they mentioned that the Netherlands is number 2 because we have a subsidiary there. We have witnessed the growth that we're just talking about. Since 2015, they enabled public road testing for autonomous vehicles, and now they have the experimental law where a test permit is issued for a vehicle without a driver inside the vehicle. So you could see that it's kind of a precursor that you need to have this enablement before you can grow the legislation, the regulation, or even the business models. And the beauty about this is it's not only for now the public sector, but it's also private sector participating. You have organizations such as the ISO and the Underwriters Laboratories now releasing their UL 4600 that we use in our design and guidelines for the policies. Although most of them right now, they're following the approach of guidance. So it's not yet mandatory and very specific steps to develop the solution, but they take the approach where you get to defend your claims as a maker and argue your safety case, and based on that you get the testing permit. And I think it's just the way to start. And the good thing as well, like Satya mentioned, that these frameworks and policies are not actually patentable. So for a city to copy a successful model and localize it, once it's adapted, then businesses will follow, and it allows for more testing and deployments. But there must be a start before getting everything in place for everyone.
All right, thank you, Ahmed. I want to be conscious of time. We have another 10 minutes and we have another question to go. Our final question is, we want to start looking at AVs from a pandemic perspective. So the two parts of the question: did the pandemic have any implications on the future of autonomous vehicles? And post-pandemic, what does the future hold for us from an autonomous vehicle adoption perspective? I'll start with you, Ahmed, if you want to share some perspectives on what the future is going to look like.
Again, I might be biased, but I think that the future is very exciting. When you look at the effect of the pandemic, what it did was actually increase the attention towards the trend of autonomous vehicles, whether in mobility, delivery, or mobility. And people are now looking into more safer and convenient transport options. So the reason why I'm excited beyond this support from the increased attention, funding is still continuing. Just recently, Neuro, which is one of the leading companies in the AV delivery market, announced another 500 million to their company. Just a few days ago, also the Giant Auto also announced with GM announced the recent that for the first time they will actually invest more in AVs and EVs than their gasoline cars for the first time in GM history. And that's also, it's an indication that the trend is pushing further. I'm also excited to see some of the cities reclaiming back the streets to bike lanes and sidewalks, which is an advantage in our case because we operate on bike lanes and sidewalks, and to other micromobility and delivery startups as well. But the reason why I'm most excited, to be honest, is that you see the development in technology in hardware and software substantially different than the past. In hardware specifically, we used to purchase a LiDAR sensor for $10,000. Now it's below $5,000, more efficient and more reliable. So as a general outlook, I think that we're accelerating towards more connected, more autonomous vehicle going to automated, going to multimodality, and shared the future for transport.
Thank you, Ahmed. Satya, if I can call on you to share some correlations, if any, as well as the future outlook for autonomous industry, please.
Yeah, thank you, Biju. COVID-19 has actually accelerated the trend, essentially, which had taken steam with the pressure that manpower constraints are putting on the transportation system. And this is where, I do want to pick up a point which Abdullah had raised earlier around, where are the use cases going to be found? And COVID-19 is actually finding some of the use cases for us. So for example, when you look at the fact that logistics, last mile movements, delivery, and public transportation do have risks when they are manned in the traditional way. AV gives you a great opportunity to essentially reduce that risk. And added to that, the fact that many countries, the developed countries, and to be fair, even Middle East, Qatar included, if you're thinking about reducing reliance in certain areas on foreign labor, I think AV gives a great opportunity as a policy tool to address that. So what's happening, we're seeing is something which had started well before COVID, but clearly, COVID is putting the spotlight on this issue. What has happened again here is in certain areas like public transport and goods movement, we are beginning to see acceleration in the deployment of autonomous transportation. So much so that in Singapore, one of the announcements recently made by the Emerging Stronger Task Force is that in response to the pandemic, we are accelerating the potential deployment of autonomous public land transport in some ways by the end of the year. So this is a very interesting development. But I just want to take a step back quickly and say development of AVs is going to increase accessibility and connectivity of public transport system because it becomes more convenient and inclusive. Countries can reduce reliance on privately owned cars, reducing congestion on roads, and free up space used in car parks and roads for other uses. So clearly, there are many long-term benefits which we believe AVs are going to bring. It's about the speed and the focus on the areas that countries want to do to address policy questions that will determine where they'll be deployed.
Thank you, Satya. Now, Firaz, if I can call on you, please, to share what, from an automotive industry, what you think are some future outlooks for autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, sure, Biju. Well, this is definitely my favorite question because we can relate to it as a distributor of Toyota and Lexus vehicles. The pandemic accelerated what clearly was, I guess, inevitable. And sometimes not all storms come to disrupt your life, but some actually come to clear your path. And looking into Toyota's global strategy of transforming from an automotive company to a mobility company, Toyota is really keen on delivering the best mobility solutions. And they are continuously working on AV research and development, and having even sponsored the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics scheduled to be held in July of next year, to showcase their mobility solutions, and such as the autonomous e-pallet, which will support the smooth movement of staff and athletes around the Olympic villages, walking area BEVs, the 1 or 2 person I-road vehicle, electric vehicle, and also with a major focus on fuel cell hydrogen vehicles, such as the 4-door sedan, the Mirai, currently actually being tested in the region, and the Sora bus. It's an electric bus that runs completely on hydrogen. So here, at least at AAB, Abdullah Abdul Ghani, we also committed ourselves to a couple of mobility projects, some as pilot programs and others launched in the market. One of these programs I can add is Lexus Flex. And to be honest with you, this is the first subscription program of its kind in the MENA region, where customers can download the app, register their credentials, and book a Lexus vehicle for a minimum of 3 months, and have their vehicle delivered directly to their doorstep. And the beauty of this program is that it's completely digital, and you can actually swap to another vehicle from a different segment. So one day you're driving an SUV, the other day you're driving a sports coupe. And it's also an opportunity for our customers to try our hybrid vehicles, which Toyota as a brand and as an automotive company is extremely proud of and big of. And at the end of the day, they get to try both worlds, the gasoline and the electric engine.
Thank you. Looks like the future where we can ask Alexa to bring our next car is close. It's not just someone driving it, but the autonomous car is going to drive itself to our houses. Finally, I want to get to Abdullah and get some of his perspectives on what from a free zone and from a city and a country perspective, what the future holds for autonomous vehicles.
Thanks. I think it's always a hard question to try to imagine what the future is going to be like based on kind of this rapidly evolving technology, right? So I think, probably when they were working on the first computers, they were just thinking, now I can calculate faster, I can calculate faster. I mean, it took them, I think, 60 years before they realized that, I can use a computer to do things more than just calculating numbers. And I think, for me, this is, I think maybe where the autonomous is going. So right now we're still talking about cars and how do I get cars to drive themselves? But actually the real question is what use cases and what experiences does that then open up? Will the future be cars, or will it be other things that are not cars? Is it going to be things like I think some of the things that the Toyota that Firas was mentioning around pallets and moving people and moving products and moving them by air, moving them by sea. And I think that we're still in the technology development phase, but once that platform is developed, I imagine that the use case themselves will transform how people move and how they move their goods as well. So I think it definitely won't stop at driverless cars. I think that much I can say. But beyond that, I think that's what people like Ahmed and some of these other makers are trying to explore and find out. And from our side, again, that's what we're also trying to explore and find out.
Thank you, Abdullah. With that, thanks to all of our fellow panelists for taking the time out of your busy schedules. I think the writing is clear. There is a future for autonomous vehicles, and all of us have to embrace it, get over the anxiety and sit in those cars so we have more time to do things that matter. On behalf of Mishara Properties and the panel, I would like to thank all of you for dialing in and listening to our insights. If you have any questions, please don't forget to submit it to dscs@misharab.com. Thanks, and have a safe and great rest of the day.
Thank you, dear panelists, and thank you, Bijou, for moderating this conversation. But before we move to an autonomous world and our third panel, food for thought is not enough to feed our human bodies. So I will leave you for a short break, grab a healthy meal, and come back at 1 p.m. for our last two panels on innovation and sustainability and pandemic readiness. We will also have a demo from Spain about a new vision of a pandemic-ready smart city. Enjoy your lunch.